Here we have round 2 of the Rising Stars tournament here in Mesa, Arizona. A really good tournament. I would really highly recommend if you're in the Phoenix area, come down to this tournament. It's run really well and it's a lot of fun. A lot of people show up to it, so you're always going to get a game against somebody different. You know, there's a lot of people. It's a good one. E4 by my opponent, and you can see in the video that I've blurred out my opponent. He asked that I didn't put his image up on the internet, and got to respect that. I think he was mostly concerned that people could look him up and know who he was, and then study how he played chess. So I told him I'd blur it out, and he said that that would be totally fine if I did that. So wanted to keep the visual here of the actual game so you can see what moves were played. But my opponent played e4, and I responded with the Caro Kann. He was trying to find a pen that worked. Problem with a lot of these tournaments is the pens. They never quite work as they should. And I think we went through like 5 or 6 this game trying to find one that actually wrote properly. I should really just bring my own. My opponent played d4, and we went into the mainland Caro Kann with d5. I wasn't sure if he'd go for an advance or an exchange or something else, and he opted for the exchange. So I quickly took back, and now we were going to look and see how he proceeded. Does he do a typical setup, knight f3, or does he put his bishop on d3, not giving me a square for my bishop? There's a few different ways to play this. I wasn't unhappy with any of them. I know the Caro Kann ideas. I just want to go for a minority attack. He goes knight f3, so I go knight to c6, and his bishop comes out for the pin action. So I also respond with the pin action with my bishop. I think bishop b4 or b5 is slightly better than bishop to e2. Here he kicked my bishop, so I just took the knight, and he developed his queen. I close off the pawn chain, and I'm just looking to get my pieces onto good squares. He short castles, and I'm wondering, do I go knight first, or do we put the bishop on e7 or d6? Those are really my 3 options here. I would like to take that pawn on d4, obviously, but my knight is pinned, so not able to do that. Knight to f6, and seeing hopefully where his bishop's going to go. If it comes to f4, then I'll go to d6, and if it comes out to g5, then I'll go to e7. He pulls the bishop out to g5, and so we simply play the bishop to e7. Not going to have any of that pin stuff. Going to short castle and going to go for the minority attack again. Before going for any kind of minority attack, I do castle my king, making sure my knight on c6 is able to move. He develops his knight to d2. A somewhat odd square for the knight because my pawn on d5 is controlling his squares that he wants to jump to. But I wasn't concerned here. I was wondering, do I go queen b6, looking at his bishop and also maybe targeting b2? Or do we go a6, kicking his bishop? Maybe he takes, then I don't have 2 connected pawns on the A and B file. So I didn't like the look of that. Maybe my queen comes to c7, just supporting the knight and then going a6. I could also put the rook on the open file, rook to c8. And then I noticed he actually has a loose piece on g5, his bishop. And so I decided to go for this idea, knight to e4. Now, if he takes my knight with his knight, he does defend the bishop, but I can take the bishop because my queen will be defending my bishop. If he takes my knight with a queen, then obviously I would take his queen with my pawn. And if he takes my bishop on e7, well, then I have knight takes d2. And if he takes my queen, then I take his queen with check, forcing an isolated pawn on h3 and double isolated pawns on f2 and f3. So I thought this maybe muddies stuff a little bit, and he may make the wrong move. He promptly finds the best response. He takes my knight. And here I was wondering, can I actually take that knight with pawn takes e4, hitting his queen, and also hitting the bishop still? I didn't think this worked though, because pawn takes, he can take my bishop. Then I take his queen. Then he takes my queen. Then I take g2, hitting his rook. He takes my pawn. I looked and looked at this move for several minutes, and I actually didn't realize that I could take on e4. So the moves would be d takes e4, bishop takes e7, e takes f3, bishop takes d8, f takes g2. And I'm doing fine here. The engine likes it. It's about equal. He would be able to take my pawn on g2 with his king, and I would take his bishop back on d8. It would be equal material. He'd have a bishop, I'd have a knight, and I just didn't like the look of it. I thought, you know, let's try to keep pieces on and complicate stuff. Yes, he would have two isolated pawns, an h3 and f2 pawn, but it just didn't seem worth it. So I decided to take his bishop on g5. My opponent here didn't take my bishop back, which I was surprised about. He instead played his knight over to c5, looking at the b7 pawn. So obviously I want to protect b7. I didn't know if I should go queen c7. That was my first instinct. I didn't know if I should put the rook on b8, especially now because he doesn't have a dark squared bishop. Then I started looking at the move queen b6, and I liked this move because I'm also looking at the b2 pawn. My long-term plan, though, also in the exchange Caro Kann, is for a minority attack. So he is simply able to just take my knight on c6, and I'll recapture with queen. But if he moves his queen away, b2 is hanging. So I feel like he's somewhat forced to take my knight, and I'll just situate my queen on c6. And I was actually completely wrong. He's not forced to take my knight. He played the move a4, which really surprised me. I wasn't expecting this. So now I can force the bishop to move with going a6. So that's one option. He doesn't have a5 because I can take his bishop on c5 or b5. But yeah, this move did take me by surprise. I decided to just let everything be and centralize my rooks. So putting one rook on d8 and maybe the other one on e8. Not entirely sure yet, but I thought I'll just hold off on whatever's going on that side of the board and try to just improve my worst pieces. And I thought my rook on a8 was my worst piece. And here my opponent does take my knight. I'm already ready to recapture with the queen. Like I said, I don't want to recapture with the pawn, as the minority attack is something I can go for. I capture the bishop, and I wait to see how my opponent's going to develop. Is he going to centralize his rooks? I'm not super worried in this game. I think I can take it to an endgame, and I can hopefully do well. You know, it seems like it's going to be hard for him to get a big attack going with just, you know, two rooks and the knight. So I was feeling pretty confident. Here my opponent plays b4. An interesting move. A minority attack maybe isn't going to happen. Maybe I'm going to start coming under fire here myself. I decide to pull my bishop back. And the reason being is my bishop was a loose piece. It wasn't attacked. It wasn't defended. I don't want to just leave pieces loose in the middle of the board. So trying to play a little bit like Capablanca, keeping all my pieces safe. The other reason I brought the bishop back was because I wanted to target that knight and potentially remove it and then take on c3. I think a better move would have been just to put my rook on d8 over to c8. I just always feel bad about moving a piece twice in the opening. You know, I should have already put it on c8 if that was, you know, one of my plans, but couldn't really have been a plan because he wouldn't have played b2 to b4. So now that he's played b4, yeah, just rook to c8, and then probably play b6, kick his knight away, and then take the pawn on c3. My opponent pulls his rook over to d1, just matching my rook on d8, and here I should have just gone rook to c8 again. Oh, psych. That's actually what I did. You know my plan. We're going to go b6 and we're going to bust stuff open. My opponent, sensing my plan of going b6, prevents it with the next move that he makes, a5, showing that he has a lot of positional understanding here. You know, he knows that I'm targeting that pawn. He also maybe wants to put his knight on a4 just to defend the pawn when his knight moves. So here I was thinking b6, a takes b6, a takes b6, knight a4. That was looking how it was going to go. And this was how it went. I played b6, he took my pawn, and I recaptured. Here he pulled his knight back to a4, like we were kind of thinking. And unfortunately, I'm not attacking the c3 pawn with a minor piece. So even though I would win it, I have 2 attackers. He's only got 1 defender. My first attacker is a queen, so I'm not going to give that up for a pawn and a knight. So I was wondering, do we have the rook going to a8, pinning the knight? Looks like it would be attacked twice. And I saw he could simply just retreat the knight, maybe back to b2. And although I was attacking the knight twice, I'm not attacking the rook on a1 twice. So I wouldn't be winning anything there. Maybe just an exchange of rooks on the a1 square. I did, however, go for this because I couldn't quite see what else I had. And I thought if I can just remove one of his rooks, I can put my other rook on c8, which is the square the rooks want to be on. So here he pulled back to b2. I took his rook and he took my rook back. Then my plan here was just to put the rook onto c8. Sensing that his knight was out of position, as it is on b2, he pulls it back to d1. I change focus and decide to put my rook onto the open file because now his knight on d1 is guarding the c3 pawn very well. So I don't really have any chance of winning that at the moment. Here I was very happy trading and getting my queen onto the a8 file. Sorry, not a1, a8. And yeah, I could maybe swing down to a3, look at the pawn, maybe even come over to b3, look at the knight, look at the pawn. I just felt like my queen might be a bit more active. My opponent goes for this trade. I recapture. And now he makes a slow sort of positional move here, right? Just putting his queen on e2. Looking on that light diagonal, cutting through the position of his dark squared pawns. Made a lot of sense. And I now had to find a way to attack. I saw that I had a bishop, he had a knight. So I did think my chances were slightly better in this endgame, but it wasn't going to be easy. I thought best to start with improving my queen, pinning the knight, you know, just don't want his pieces to move around, and also targeting the c3 pawn. This looked like a very good square for myself. Maybe he wants to get his king out of the pin. He'll go king to h2, and then maybe I have bishop d6, you know, just targeting the king. He does go to pick up his king here. He took some time here, and then, yeah, he played king to h2. I was thinking, yeah, immediately bishop d6, because if he plays g3, it seems like it's a weakening move, pushing the pawns further away from his king. I did, however, change my mind, and I find the best move, well, the engine says multiple moves are best here, but bishop to g5. I just thought, after some time thinking, that this diagonal looked a little stronger for the bishop. I didn't want a passive bishop on d6, just looking at, you know, h2 and that's it. You know, I thought maybe I can get my bishop involved in the other side of the game. All his pawns were on dark squares, so maybe bringing the bishop back to c1 and then even up to b2. Wasn't sure yet. It seemed very difficult to find an edge in this game, and again, the engine does say that it is an equal position. My opponent, sensing that his dark squared pawns were going to be targeted at some point here, pulls his queen over to c2. My best move here is pawn to h5, starting a a kingside attack. The only other move that gives me the very slightest edge is queen to a6, controlling that long squared light diagonal. I didn't go for either of these moves. I took a couple minutes deliberating here and decided I wanted to chance a bishop versus knight endgame. So I put my queen on c1. He took my queen, I took his queen, and I just liked the look of this endgame. I thought my bishop can maybe do some work here. I wanted to improve my king and keep my bishop on some long diagonals. Now, there is something that I really learned from this endgame. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, I knew I had to centralize my king, so I put it on f8. He moved his king further into the center, putting his king on f3, and I moved immediately up to e7. He proceeded with king to e2, and I played king to d6. He improves his kingside pawns, going g3. And here, what I really needed to do, and I didn't consider, was opening the position up. I want to trade off pawns immediately, you know, get stuff traded off so that there's more lines for the bishop to target. And I think this is something I just need to remember to do. I have a lot of fine moves here, but I do think that should be my main focus. I've centralized my king. Let's open up lines because I have a bishop and he's got a knight. He's already got his plan in his mind. The reason he went g3 is because he wants to put his pawn on f4. And that's another thing. I need to consider, what is my opponent's plan? Putting the pawn on f4, he knows that he's closing off lines for my bishop. And maybe he's going to be able to trap my bishop. And so I continued kind of like a dummy, moving my king around. And here I realized, sort of into a bit of trouble here. I don't have any good squares for my bishop. He's effectively trapped it. All right, this is where I'm going to spend a bit of time here talking about these moves because it's a very interesting position. My opponent was sitting there not actually paying too much attention to the position. He was looking at other boards and things, and I think he would have been very surprised about the move that I was trying to calculate if I had gone for it. But here, there's really only one good plan. Everything else is losing, and I spent a long time in this position. The move I was considering was g5. Now, g5 seems kind of crazy. Let me just go through the lines. So if I play g5 and he takes on g5, well, then my bishop can come out and I'm totally fine. However, he's not going to take the pawn on g5. He's going to instead attack my bishop. So king would go to c2. And here I was really trying to think in my mind, g takes f4. He takes my bishop. F takes g3. His knight jumps to e3. And then what do I have? My king could then move up to c4 or a4 and come around and harass the c3 pawn. And he's not able to defend the c3 pawn as well as stop my g3 pawn. So that's what I should have gone for. And I had a long think about this. I ended up deciding to do something which I knew was not correct. And I'm quite frustrated that I didn't go for this. And you do need to spend time calculating in a chess game. I had the time here. I did calculate it. And I saw that far that my pawn could get to g3. His knight would be left babysitting it. And then I just didn't put the final piece of the puzzle together saying, well, then my king can gobble up his queenside pawns. And that's what I needed to go for. Instead, I played a move that ultimately loses me the game. Although this game still is very interesting. So do keep watching here. Now, some of you might be saying, Owen, how do you know that your opponent wasn't thinking through these things? Ultimately, I don't. It just seemed that he was a bit distracted. He essentially thought that he had already won this position. And I mean, it really looks like he has if I don't have that g5 resource. And g5, let me be clear, doesn't win me the game. It just keeps equality. The move bishop a3 didn't win for me either because Yes, my king can defend the bishop on a4, but then he can just move his king in and then move his knight in, and he's going to be totally fine. Or even move his knight wherever he wants and jump around until he wins all my pawns. You know, it wasn't possible for me to not defend the bishop. You know, my king would just be stuck defending it on a4. So the move I ended up going with, which is obviously the mistake, is king to c6. And here we have an exciting endgame. He attacks my bishop. I pull the bishop over to a3. He pulls his knight over to f2, looking to put the knight on a very, very good square. I centralize my king again on d6. He puts his knight on d3, the very good square that I was talking about now. The reason this is such a good square is because his king can come to b3 and my bishop is trapped. I start trying to push my kingside pawns. I go h6. He moves in to attack my bishop. I take a pawn with myself as I sentence myself to death here, putting my bishop on b4. He takes on b4. And now I'm just hoping, can I do something on the king side? I advance my pawn up to g5. He moves his king up to b5, attacking my weak queenside pawns. I don't want to give him a pawn for free, so I pull back to c7. And since he has an extra minor piece, he starts using it. He pulls over to e5, targeting my f7 pawn. So can I push it here? Well, do I have any other choice? That answer is no. I push up to f6, f7 to f6, attacking his knight. He moves the knight to f7, attacking my h6 pawn. So I capture on f4, and he recaptures. G takes f4. Here I try to lock up the pawns a wee bit. I go h5. I don't really want to move my king further over into the other part of the game, and he goes h4, locking in the target. I move my king over to d7, trying to stay as active as possible with my king. He moves his knight over to h6, and there's really no good way for me to play this game. You know, it's going to be very difficult. If I don't go to the king side, then he's going to go back to g8 and probably take that pawn. And if I don't go to the queen side, I'm going to lose the b6 pawn. So I go for king to e7. He takes the pawn. And now I started to wonder, do I have a way to trap his knight? Moving in to g7 here, you know, his knight's completely trapped. And that looked kind of good for me, but I knew that he's able to just gobble up more material with his king. And he knows it too. I advance up to g7, and yes, he's losing his knight here, but he's able to just keep moving his king in. So here he plays his king to d6. Here it's actually a forced mate in 14 moves according to Stockfish. There wasn't really anything else I could go for. I just take his knight. He takes my pawn on e6, and now I'm just stuck. I move the king over to g6, trying to defend what I've got. He pushes up with check. I pull back, and he continues to bully me with his dominant position. He just takes another pawn. He's got lots of pawns that can push up the board, and there's really no wrong way to do this for him. He can, walk his king around and try to or take opposition, sort of shoulder my king, because my pawns can't move right now. So he could do that if he wants, or he could just advance his queenside pawns. And the way he does it is extremely simple. He tries to take a better position with his king, and then he'll start advancing his pawns up the board. Or will he move over and take my f6 pawn? He decides to move over. Very methodical way of playing. Taking on f6. And then he can even just sit on g7, and there's nothing I can do. He's got a red carpet for his pawn, and he's going to win this game. So I will just put that into speed mode here for you. I think there's a lot to learn from these over the board tournaments. They're really good for your chess. And again, do go to the tournament here in Mesa, Arizona, the Rising Stars, if you're able to. It's a fantastic tournament. The engine said that he played with a 93.3% accuracy. He only had 1 inaccuracy the entire game, and I had 5 inaccuracies and 1 mistake. So I suppose I did deserve to lose this game, although I do think it all came down to that one moment with the G5 move that I didn't play. Really enjoyed this round. Hope to see my opponent again over the board and get my revenge. But I'll see you all very soon. Bye for now.